The True Story of Gina Hall, Video 10, to the best of my knowledge. This video will be one of the slightly longer ones, but I believe in the end your curiosity will be ignited just as was mine. Let's begin with King's later handwritten statement from July 1980. His exact words he chose to write, like these words, visible pressure. Steve introduced me to Gina, and I walked out slightly ahead of them to the car. Let's see, we have behind them, we stopped in the doorway and you introduced me to her, and now we have walking slightly out ahead of them to the car. I don't know. I opened the door and gave the key to Steve. It seemed Gina was confused as to whether I was going and whether she was going in my car or not. Steve did not in any way put any visible pressure on Gina to leave, and she seemed willing. I am not sure she knew where she was going, but she may have. She and Steve conversed, and Steve answered, saying they were taking her car. Steve said, "That's all right, isn't it?" And she said yes. I went back in the Marriott. Knowing my sister, in my opinion, that did not happen. In his December court testimony, King adds two pieces of new information, never shared in any prior statements or interviews. This is when he states for the first time that he saw Gina dancing with Steve 4 to 5 times. And King, on his way out of the Marriott, added in that court testimony that Epperly asked to borrow his car, and he said no. I think that's relevant to add that 6 months later. After King gave Epperly the keys, he says he turned around and walked back in. He said he did not see them leave or who was driving, and when cross-examined, King was asked, "So they got in the car? Did you watch them get in the car?" He replied, "I turned around." The defense quizzed him. "Do you know who drove?" "No, I don't know. I turned around and I walked off." "You didn't have another key to the lake house, did you?" "No." And then of most interest to me was when King was asked by the prosecuting attorney, Everett Shockley, "Who all went out to the car?" "Myself and Mr. Epperly and Gina." "Anyone else?" "To the best of my knowledge, no." You know, I could see, to the best of my knowledge, if someone asked you to name everyone that was in the Marriott that night, or to try to list off all the people that Gina danced with, or King danced with, or he danced with. That would make sense. And to reiterate, he is the only one that definitively ever said that Gina danced with Epperly 4 to 5 times. Simple math poses an impossibility unless you ignore every other witness from inside the Marriott that night. And then still. So to only consider King's testimony to describe the dance scene, well, you know, giving names and stating to the best of my knowledge is reasonable when you're recalling a large list of a large group of people. But when you're only listing 3 names, myself, Mr. Epperly, and Gina, how do you not just answer that question with a straight yes or no? When you're asked how many went out, was that it? Anyone else? No, just 3 of us. It's really a simple question. And along those same lines, why in the world would you need to, in your written statement, use the words, "Steve put no visible pressure on Gina to leave"? Some believe that King, Epperly's best friend, turned on him. And that was the reason that Epperly was convicted. Well, I would propose that we look at this from a very different perspective. And we might begin by questioning this. Why would Epperly submit a letter to the judge on December the 13th during the trial, 2 days after King's testimony, where he made, during that testimony, King made really one statement that should have upset Epperly, somewhat incriminating. A friend asks a friend, did you kill the girl? And the friend answers, well, we'll just have to see, I don't know. Having heard King's words, sitting right there in the courtroom, but yet 2 days later in that letter to the judge, Epperly still names King in his list of people that he said the defense should have called as his character witness. There were about 5 or 6 named, and King's still on that list. I would scratch King's name off that list if I thought he said something incriminating. Maybe there's something we just don't know. I would also consider why the higher courts, which would be the most important reason to realize the relevance of this testimony, King's testimony, the higher courts in the appeals decision, they did not name his testimony as one of the reasons that they denied Epperly's request for an appeal, and they did not overturn the conviction in their decisions. So they gave that testimony no true relevance. Could it be that the higher courts somehow just know how to read testimony and tell when someone is contradicting themselves within that same testimony? Maybe that's why they're in the higher court positions. I also could wonder that maybe they too searched the internet, because had they would find that a certain person in his years at Virginia Tech hired an attorney to represent him as a student accused of honor code violations, to fight the honor code system of the school, because the honor code committee that judges lying and cheating are made up of peers, professors, students, etc. And he ascertained they were not qualified to judge him. Thus, the decision rendered against him was not fair. If you ask me, that's privilege. Thankfully, Gina's case did not hinge on his testimony. I will always say emphatically that Epperly's conviction came about because not only about Epperly's own arrogance and confidence, but because of my daddy, John Hall. He never gave up. And Gina, her goodness, that brought everyone collectively together the entire summer. Policemen spending their days off, searching for a girl they never met, but came to know. Trooper Austin Hall, a devoted man whose integrity was recognized and respected by my dad. Gina's friends and new friends, searching day in and day out, finding the crucial evidence, the crucial connecting evidence of Gina to the lake house. A young prosecuting attorney, Everett Shockley, who believed in the power of right to still trump wrong. And a very important piece, Gina's character. It could not be discredited by the defense. But most important, it was prayer. Gina's light shining bright in that darkness. During the initial hours after Gina did not come home, our friends were there to help me. And it would be those friends that would find my car abandoned beside Hazel Hollow Road on the Pulaski County side of the New River near the train trestle that crosses the New River into Radford Monday afternoon. It was about 36 hours or so since I had last heard Gina's voice. Steve. My friends, my dad, and I, we saw that car. We saw the interior. We saw the front seat pushed all the way back, knowing immediately someone else, not Gina, had driven that Monte Carlo. And most importantly, we saw that broken inside, driver's side, car door, pull, handle. I want to assure you, when my car left for the Marriott that night, the interior of my car was in perfectly good order. It was touched on a little bit in the court testimony, because I was very picky with my car back in those days, like most young people who buy their first car with their first job and their first paycheck. When we arrived at the scene of my abandoned Monte Carlo, after our two friends found the car, Robert Lent and Craig Runyon, my dad and I and our friends, we noticed everything in that moment of reality. When those who loved Gina looked inside that car, we knew something bad had happened to Gina. And that is exactly why Robert Lent never forgot it. And he shared as he did in his court testimony. Thank heavens. He too would never forget seeing the driver's side broken car door handle, I believe were his exact words. It is amazing to me to see how that is what stood out most to we who loved Gina when we were at the car site on Monday afternoon. Yet, as the theory evolves and molds to the composed story, a story written by Gina's killer and his best friend, a preconceived mindset of a girl who went willingly, no one seems to give attention to that broken car door handle. Ignored, forgotten. I am reminded of a recent expert panel presentation at RU about Gina's case in the fall of 2019, where someone asked that question, and no one on the stage seemed to remember the broken car door handle when asked about it. I was sitting in a business dinner in Kansas City when my phone went crazy with texts and video clips being sent to me by people who cared about Gina, disturbed, disappointed at what they saw. And they wanted me to know about this. Recently, a self-proclaimed expert in Gina's case called me, very disrespectful, and suggested that I am illogical in my thinking, that car door handles and car parts get broken all the time. I have intentionally tried in these videos to share only facts and not interject my own opinions too much. But I can't resist this one. Our thoughts define who we are, and our thoughts are created by our experiences, our reality, our beliefs. And often these beliefs are conditioned beliefs. Sometimes we don't even recognize. Which is why change can be a challenge. So I would have to pause and ask a person who takes that fact, a broken inside car door handle, and when we're talking about a strap this long on the interior of my door, long and skinny, and you can pull on it, and it would be really hard to break. Very hard. This was the 70s when they made cars. Really pretty sturdy. Respectfully, is it logical that someone does not even consider the possibility that Gina broke it, holding on to it with everything in her? Let's go back to the experience that makes our reality and our beliefs. Let's see what it's like. Let's experience it as if, like we who loved Gina did. You know, we walked up, we saw the interior of the car, and yes, that experience definitely influenced my belief. Well, let's let it be your experience for a moment. You know the person, you know who they are, you know their character, and that person has been missing for days. Let that person be your daughter, your son, your wife, your husband, your sister, your brother, your friend. And you walk up to the car and you see what we saw that day. And you see how your perspective quickly changes. Then tell me again that I am being illogical with some BS excuse like stuff breaks in a car all of the time. Honestly, that is beyond disrespectful to Gina. You are not Gina's spokesperson. Why do people continue to take the facts and try to make them fit the composed story? And if it doesn't fit, then it's just discarded or ignored, or even so far as to say it's illogical. Why? What's the real why behind the why on that one? What's the purpose? Arrogance? Pride? Money? Well, consider this. What if a person has a vested interest in that old composed story holding true? To really get down to the root of that thought, well, the Bible does say the root of all evil is the love of money. To be a better person, we must pay attention to our thoughts and realize when they are influenced by something that does not align with the person that you want to be. Where there is good, there will be bad, and where there is bad, there will be good. Like gunshots. First they were investigated, and then somebody surmised that it must have been that small cannon at Claytor Lake, that it must have fired. But when they confirmed that this small cannon had not been shot, the gunshot still got forgotten, like put on a back shelf and ignored. The journey showed me the battle of what goes on, and it also showed me the facts that paint the true picture of this night, a forceful abduction against her will. They took Gina. And there are accomplices that never were held accountable. Well, some are dead now. I guess they are being held accountable. Thoughts, always good versus bad. And just knowing and realizing when your thoughts are being influenced. Life can be amazing because we really are our thoughts. Change your thoughts, change your life. So not too much extra delaying in this video, but the last video that I do will share a little of my background and who I am and why that is hard for me not to share my opinions about everything. But just know I am Gina Hall's sister. I know Gina. I know her character. I know who she was in the short 18 years of her life. And that car door handle being broken by force, respectfully, is not illogical. Good won in 1980 when that witnessed event ended up recorded in those court transcripts. Thank you, Robert. Just like my own words are recorded, and King's testimony, all given under oath, under God. Like this statement, to the best of my knowledge, who was in my Monte Carlo that night? Who was involved in that night? Someone was. Marlboro cigarette butts filled the ashtray. Fast food trash from 2 people. The orange Tennessee plastic cup. All not from Gina or us. So who? My Monte Carlo provided a lot of interesting evidence. The outside evidence became very relevant in trying to solve where the car had been and maybe where Gina's remains had been taken and hidden. But the inside car evidence was not probed much after the first few days. Again, the foundational preconceived thought that two people just rode off from the Marriott, partying, headed out to the lake for a good time. It influenced ignoring the inside of the car. The family's objective in 1980 was to find Gina, not dissect their lies. At the scene of the abandoned car, the police noted a screwdriver laying on the ground up under the front wheel. A car key was found on the ground underneath the back trunk. The cobwebs were covering the car's mirrors and the headlights. There were pine tree needles, short pine tree needles, down in the crack of the back of the windshield. There were cattail seeds, sticky, remnants stuck to the front grille of the car. That didn't end up in the report, but there were. Cattails do grow in the ditches on the sides of the roads in the New River Valley, so maybe they came from the abduction site ditch off of McCoy Road. Mud was on two tires just on one side of the car, and interestingly, there is an alley road lined with pine trees that borders the Epperly home place, specifically bordering a shed, and Epperly uses that place as when he hunted and gutted his deer, that shed. But there are short pine tree needles everywhere in the New River Valley. Remember the 3 a.m. slow driver and Epperly stating that Gina dropped him off around 4 a.m. at his home on 2nd Street in Radford? Well, I believe that Epperly included that part in his composed story that Gina dropped him off at his house at 4 a.m. instead of just saying she left the lake house and, to go home. I think it's relevant. And I think maybe he added that little extra part to his composed storyline because my car actually did go to his house. And just in case someone had seen the Monte Carlo there at his house, it needed to become part of his lies. I believe Gina was in the trunk of the car on the 3 a.m. slow driver trip and was taken out and left at the place off of Hazel Hollow Road, the place I call the Miracle Place. In 1980, an early rumor flying about was Epperly buried Gina under a cow feeder. This area was far enough off of the road, yet easily accessible, softened mud-like an area, and I believe it was intentionally temporary. Epperly then drove my car to the Monte Carlo to his house, and maybe my car pulled into that alley and backed up to the shed, and only the two driver's side wheels ended up over in the grass, getting a little mud on them. Grabbing some tools from the shed, from his hunting shed, like a hunting knife, a mattock, short-handled shovel, whatever, and then drove back down Hazel Hollow Road, pulling back into that area, which could also explain the cattail seeds, stopping at that area to do where I believe he left Gina a little after 3 a.m. I call that area the Muck Place, the same place I talked about in Gina's Legacy video, the place from the 2016 search. But let's look closer at the timeline around 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. on Sunday morning of this day made in hell to determine the significance of that place off of Hazel Hollow Road. I already spoke about in another video that is very near where the IDs were found from our shared clutch wallet. It's right off of Hazel Hollow Road. It's about 2 miles from the trestle. And it's where the miracle picture was taken. So in a way, it's a very sad place, but a very miraculous place. A place that makes this Bible lesson come to life. God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God. or those who are called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. Or that same verse I mentioned earlier, good versus bad. The one who does good is of God. That would be Gina. And the one who does evil has not seen God. 3 John 1:11. There's those ones for those who know me. Makes me smile. This same location I named the Muck Place, right off of Hazel Hollow Road, was identified in November 2019 as a place registering for Gina's organic marker left behind, maybe having bled there substantially, because this instrument's hit was strong, second only to the lower corner of the lake house for Gina. But also at this same location, a very small mass reading of Caucasian bone, very small, registered in the same exact place off of Hazel Hollow Road. Now it could have flown from up above from that ravine into this area. We don't know. But it did show up. Well, when we brought the dogs in January 2020, they also zeroed in. These human remains detection dogs confirmed organic human remains in that very same location that we had identified in November. And miraculously, it's the same place as the image on the water photo that I captured in 2016. So it might be a place one day that I drain. I dig under all the rock bed. 40 years is a long time. And I search to try to retrieve the evidence for Gina's DNA. But for now, I just question, why a small bone mass? I mean, I believe Gina was placed there, bleeding from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. She could have had a knocked out tooth when he threw her on the ground. But this is a sad thought, because maybe he knew by the time he would get back at 6 a.m., after cleaning the house, that her corpse would be very heavy 3 hours later and not easily movable. So maybe he did what any hunter would do. Gina most definitely was not his first murder. He already knew what he was going to do, following the same ritualistic behavior, going to what he calls sacred ground. His sacred ground. That, in my humble opinion, is why she was not the one in DeHart's boat. All of this is all just theory. Even with all of the different information pieces, we still just can theorize. But what I do know, beyond any doubt, is that this place off of Hazel Hollow Road is the miracle place. Just have to look at the front cover of my book, where the photo of the miraculous journey was captured. A place where I was shown that Gina's soul did indeed meet Jesus, and he held her in his arms. You just know when God wants you to know something. He showed all of us. All of us. That's the only reason there's a book. It's the only reason I'm making these videos. That's the only reason I know all of these facts, the miracles from 2016 and 2017. The journey. What I experienced truly is miraculous. I believe Eppley came back at 6 a.m. and retrieved Gina's physical remains, but her soul was not there. And my belief, and that's why I can talk about this openly. Here are the facts that support the 6 a.m. theory, and this is where it gets very interesting. Another timeline conundrum. Epperly was reported to have left the lake house at 4:15 a.m. driving the Monte Carlo, yet not even 2 miles down the road at 5 a.m., the Monte Carlo is now being driven recklessly, not slowly, coming from the direction of the lake house, crossing the center line, and running a car driven by David Sauls off the road at 5 a.m. Mr. Sauls and his wife deliver morning newspapers, which is a time-oriented task, so I trust his 5 a.m. I remember hearing about this in 1980, but I did not realize until recently, these recent years, that David Sauls, this honored veteran, and his wife, who were interviewed twice, they never became part of the court testimony. That surprised me. I understand why now. Timelines are important. So this 5 a.m. witnessed timeline event that never became public knowledge, later, for whatever reason, is of interest to Epperly. Epperly has lists, and yes, I have guards and people, and they just come by and come into my life, and they show me things in the last 4 decades. Well, I remembered seeing David Sauls' name on a list, one of Epperly's lists, that I now realize was a list of ideas of his thought process regarding what can my defense use to win my appeals, like what are all the different angles, and David Sauls was on that list. And no one really knew about David Sauls. So why, I wondered. So every detail in that David Sauls interview became of most interest to me. A person who owned a fishing bait shop very near the trestle, and who also reported seeing a van parked not too far from the abandoned Monte Carlo around 6 a.m. So let's go back and recap with more facts. King and Robinson say Epperly left around 4:15 a.m. in the Monte Carlo, which is seen at 5 a.m. by David Sauls just a mile or two down the road. Epperly is driving recklessly, racing against the sunrise, abandoning the Monte Carlo near the trestle so he could easily cross the river, opening the trunk, my car key dropping off of the keychain that was always coming loose, throwing the keys back in the car back seat, crossing the trestle, carrying Gina's clothes, accidentally dropping one of her shoes on the other side of the trestle, throwing the blue towel into the woods to be found later by one of our Coben friends, taking weeks off from his work to stay in Radford and help us search for Gina. Epperly was then witnessed at 5:15 a.m. crossing the Thrifty Shopping Center parking lot by a co-worker driving by. Epperly continuing across Main Street to his home, going to the shed, down in the corner of the Epperly home place, because in 2018, local cadaver dogs did alert to the floor of that shed. Maybe it is where Gina's bloody clothes or a bloody tool had been initially placed, or maybe the cadaver alert doesn't even relate to Gina, but another human's blood. But it definitely alerted. After he went to the shed or whatever, he then came back to the abandoned car to meet up with that white van, witness parked nearby by David Sauls at 6 a.m., driving back up the Hazel Hollow to retrieve Gina's corpse and onto his place, the sacred place, his place. I remind the listener that the Sunrise Dismemberment lead that ignited my quest for truth in 2016 also included a witnessed white van backed down to Meadow Creek. And it fits the timeline of events. And unfortunately, that same Meadow Creek dismemberment area borders a farm that was one of Epperly's favorite hunting grounds from the time of his youth, because that farm was owned by a relative of Epperly. And interestingly, that same family farm is connected to another very notorious New River Valley criminal, the one I believe is at the top of the hierarchy, a man who would easily bring fear to a bunch of barbell boys, Wallace Thrasher, a close friend of his same family. Thrasher was a pallbearer in his young years, his young 20s, for his best high school friend's grandmother, the matriarch of this same family farm. A man who also had a passion for hunting, just like Epperly, So a farm frequented by both men. A place where the two most likely met. Friends, associates, maybe. Last September, I was painting some picnic tables for a barbecue that I do every year for the first responders related to my business. And I thought, like, pay attention to your thoughts. This thought popped in my head because I'm a businesswoman. If I were a bandit who went up in a plane transporting drugs to the United States from down south, why would I fly an empty plane back down there? Why would I not make money both ways, down and back? Could that have to do with Epperly's list of 100 women's names? I saw, like a ledger listing the women and where they each are from and their descriptions when you did not know their name. 50 of the 100 were from the Fort Lauderdale area. My thoughts: serial rapist? Definitely. Murderer? Yes. Not just Gina. Even those months in 1980, there may have been 3 or 4 that summer. In just the months we know about. Serial killer? Yet to be determined. But the hidden question: trafficker? Possibility. Thrasher's partner in crime in his drug business? His plane, according to, I don't know 100% for sure, but according to someone that's doing research on it right now, it was equipped to land on water. Just a theory. I will never forget my experiences in the spring of 2017. I share in Chapter 22 of The Miraculous Journey. I made a decision to be hypnotized, trying to discover if there was something I just was missing and had forgotten from 1980. And while under hypnosis, not conscious, my body physically shaking, visible to the hypnotist, and I yelled out. Mother Nature wants those bodies out of the ground. Shocked the hypnotist. Shocked me when I listened to the hours of recordings from that sessions, for that 2 full days of sessions. I had no idea then what would be unveiled throughout the next 2 years. We will not believe what has been right under our nose when we all finally know Epperly's secrets. Relevant question. In 2018, Epperly refers to that same family farm as sacred ground. Why would Epperly refer to this area, a witnessed dismemberment site by a very honorable man, Lincoln Duncan? Why would he refer to this area as sacred ground? Epperly is a ritualistic man. So to the best of your knowledge, who walked out to that car? Who was in that car? Who are the pawns and who are the kings protecting? Pawns protect kings in the game of chess. But know this, in the end, know who is really in charge of this chess game. And it's really not a game.